community in all these cities. And so that was, that really is what launched me. I'm not surprised in the least that I would be drawn to, I was drawn to a career in philanthropy because my mother had me working as a young child, helping. We were volunteering with every nonprofit organization in the cities that we lived in, and to help connect the local community, and especially the diplomatic community, because as you know, many times the spouses of these diplomats working abroad are incredibly bright, talented, have careers, but are not able to practice because they don't have visas. And so my mother was a genius at getting matchmaking and putting everyone to work. And so that was instrumental for me to have that formative base of just seeing how in every country there's huge need, as we know, some worse than others. And I loved that. That was a passion of mine. There was nothing more gratifying than helping others. And to this day, I tell my clients of all types, backgrounds, that the greatest gift you can give your children or your friends is the gift of giving, that it is the most powerful gift. And there is actually research and data that shows that the more people give of their time and resources, that the happier they are. This is actually scientifically proven, and it makes perfect sense just because it's such a fulfilling experience to know that you can not just help others, but make the world a better place. And every little bit matters. Every little amount and every bit of time adds up, as you know. So that is really what propelled me, just to give you the background as to why I pursued this career in philanthropy. I did toy with the idea of joining the Foreign Service myself, like my father, because I was also very interested in the work he did around peace building and conflict resolution and democracy building. And I was very intrigued by it. And then I met my husband, Alex, and he is a professor. So I remember thinking, well, that career, it's not as portable. And so I thought, as long as I can work in still dealing with international development issues related to democracy and philanthropy, I will be happy. So my parents, both my mother and my father, were the inspiration for me to pursue this career in philanthropy. It made perfect sense. I don't think I realized it when I was in college, but that's exactly where I was heading. And as a result, because I'd worked in so many nonprofits growing up as a volunteer, at some point I started working for nonprofits full time. And that was really where I learned so much about a variety of issue areas. And in graduate school, ranging from climate change to poverty alleviation, and then gender issues in particular. So when I went to graduate school, I really focused my master's thesis on gender equity issues, because I realized as I was doing research and poverty alleviation that it was obvious that unless over half the population are women, and unless they are empowered and have equal rights and access to the same opportunities in education and professional opportunities, that they would not be able to reach their full potential. And also, as you may know, there's actually research that shows that World Bank and others have done research showing that the most effective way to really invest and accelerate change in terms of poverty alleviation is by investing in women and girls. And so that's been the trend now over the past decade, because there were some early funders who'd been working in this space for decades, and it was obvious to them. And I think for some it was, they didn't need to see the research to know that intuitively. But the research just showed that was exactly what happened. Women would reinvest in their families and their children and their communities. And that was not the case when they were giving the money to the men, sad to say. But that's just been the reality. And so there's the trend in philanthropy has been, the movement around supporting women and girls organizations. And I actually have worked with some very large philanthropists who came to that on their own conclusion as well. One of the early Google executives in technology had reached out to me when I was working at a women and girls organization and said, I've come to the conclusion after all my research that the fastest return on my investment is by supporting women and girls organizations. So that has been that has been a really, a proven strategy, is an effective way to accelerate social change. So so of course, in growing up, I had the personal experience of working closely with my mother in these countries and seeing firsthand the need and the opportunities to help more women and girls, and to see how transformative that is. And then, of course, as you know, when you go to Scandinavian countries and the more gender equitable countries, they end up having much more balance in terms of, and as a result, the economic resources are also higher, right? So these are countries who end up performing better economically. So I oftentimes will, when I work with some of the business community leaders and corporations, will tell them, if for nothing else, I mean, the profits themselves speak, for themselves. These companies who are more gender friendly and gender equitable end up doing much better. And there's been a whole trend in that regard as well. California has already made it a requirement for the state's corporations. Any corporation who's based there has to have a board and has to have representation of women as well, because historically it's been that it's male dominated, and as you know, unless there's an equilibrium, you're not going to reach the ideal results. So that's been great to see in the field. At some point, after working in the nonprofit world and helping, working with donors, I've been working very closely with the philanthropic community in the women and girls space. So I got to know all the big funders, from the foundations to the individual philanthropists who have been working to support and build a very strong women's movement in the United States and globally, for that matter, including Greece. And you may have seen this as well, depending on how closely you track the women and girls space. But there was also research done about a decade ago by a professor in the United States who found that countries that have a strong women's movement have lower levels of violence against women, which you probably know the number one issue still, sadly, that women face is violence against women. That is by far, and that sadly, transcends economic backgrounds. I mean, this is a universal problem. And so one of the reasons why countries have, and the organizations that I have been involved with, have really made an emphasis to fund these women's movements, because the stronger the women's movement, the violence decreases and just more gender equity laws and policies are passed. So that's, that is a key piece in all of this, is thinking more broadly and strategically about reinforcing the women's movements in each of these countries, and that's true in our country, in the United States as well. I think it's become a little too political, unfortunately, but nonetheless, it's been there's several fabulous women's networks who have been working very strategically over the past few decades. One of my favorites is called the Women Donors Network, and that group, I would say it's about maybe 300 members, mainly Americans, but they can be all over the world, and they have been very strategic about how to ensure that women's organizations at every level, from political to economic, are being well funded, and that they have the resources they need. Obviously, the climate in the United States has been very challenging because of the attack on women's reproductive rights. And so that we sadly have been regressing, as you know, in some of the southern states, which is problematic, because we've made such progress thanks to Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and many other leaders, and sadly we're now regressing. And this is, we see this in different regions around the world, and it obviously is connected with political leadership. In Latin America, over a decade ago, there was a lot of progress in terms of women's reproductive rights. And countries that traditionally were completely opposed to this were actually making headway and passing laws and policies in favor of this, because, as you know, that's a critical component, is ensuring women's reproductive rights in order for them to have the opportunities to pursue employment and just set the trajectory for their life. And so that's a really fundamental component. And sadly, over a decade ago, the large foundations like Ford and Rockefeller and Kellogg, who had been traditionally funding the women's organizations in Latin America, thought, oh, it looks like things are going well. We can pull back. And so it was very short-sighted on their part, because they pulled out of the region, closed out some of the offices, and then focused their money elsewhere, like Africa and other places that they thought were in more need. But it was a shame, because in the process, political turnover made it such that many of those countries ended up losing those hard-fought laws and policy, and so they've also regressed in some countries. So that's been a challenge. And by the way, if you have any questions as I'm talking, please feel free to interject. And I will move. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I was going to pull up, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview in terms of how I got to working in philanthropy, and specifically focusing on women and girls. Because, being half Mexican and traveling to Mexico and being very familiar with the culture of machismo that I would see firsthand in Latin America, and in some of the Romance countries. I mean, Spain is actually one of the countries I compared Latin America to, some of the models that they use to create the social change and change cultural norms. So we're also quite machista, but they've obviously, as you know, Spain has come a long way and has made huge progress, and they have a very strong women's movement. And so that's part of it, is ensuring and maintaining that movement, so that the next generation doesn't take those rights for granted, because they can be lost very easily, as we're seeing now in the United States. And so that is what prompted me to then pursue a career in philanthropy. I specifically was working on human rights, women's rights, gender equity. In the process of doing so, about 7 years ago, the head of the Women's Donor Network, she's based there in San Francisco, reached out to me and asked me if I could do philanthropic advising for one of their board members, who had a small family foundation in Northern California, where I was living at the time. And so I said, I'd be happy to do so. I thought it would be a great opportunity. And that's really what launched me into the whole philanthropic advising world, which I was, not as familiar with, although I'd been working with all of those philanthropists for over a decade, 2 decades. And so that was very interesting, because I had previously been on the fundraising side for nonprofits and helping them raise millions of dollars. And then now I pivoted to the other side, which is helping philanthropists and helping donors think about how to be more effective with their philanthropy, and be strategic in terms of allocating funds to the right organizations. And so it's been a really fascinating journey over the past decade in this new career that I've been working in, but all interconnected with my background. So it's been just a great joy and a passion of mine. And I would be doing it anyway, but this is it is my career. So I pinch myself that I get to do good and help others, and create bridges and help address the divides through these different areas that I care about, like I mentioned, democracy and then just human rights, but gender equity in particular. So for Women's History Month, which is, I know, the focus of the month of March, but for me, it's every day and every month of the year. I love that it's a month in which people think twice about women's rights and what they can do to help strengthen their countries and the globe, for that matter, and in solidarity, as we're all in this together, and we're seeing that all these issues really are interconnected. So I've had the pleasure of working with a myriad of nonprofit organizations around the world, and I wanted to highlight some of those with you. And just share some of my favorites. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, but I always tell donors that one of the best ways to really know the effectiveness of an organization is, sure, you can look at their the website ratings. There's websites like GuideStar and Charity Navigator. These are websites that will rate nonprofits. You can enter any nonprofit and their ratings will appear, but I always tell them you have to take them with a grain of salt, because it doesn't give you the whole picture. It doesn't give you the whole story. It doesn't account for the leadership and the board and the staff. And there's a lot more that goes into evaluating an effective nonprofit organization. And so, what I always tell them is, if you can get to know the leaders in the community, that's much more, I think, an effective way of knowing how impactful they are as an organization. So I've selected a few to share with you, and I'll pull up my screen, and I'll also give you just a few highlights on the philanthropic sector and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Fidelity and Fidelity Charitable or the donor advised fund world. Have you heard much about that? Okay. I can tell you a little bit about it. I don't know for those of you, I mean, and I didn't realize this when I was working in philanthropy that we'd always write checks and give through credit cards, but the most effective way is to actually give through a donor advised fund. Not that you have to do it through Fidelity, you can do it through anybody, really, but they started it 20 plus years ago. No, 30 years ago now. But now depending on who you bank with, you should ask them about it if they have a donor advised fund. I recommend getting one, and I'll tell you why in a little bit, but it's the most effective way because you end up getting, it's pooled with everybody else's money. So you end up getting extra money at the end of the year to give away versus just, you get a tax write-off. But if you do it by check and credit card, you don't end up getting the additional funding that comes from being pooled with others. So that's I think one of the best kept secrets in philanthropy is that all of these strategic philanthropists I work with all have a donor advised fund, but also work, and the other thing, it allows you to give anonymously too for people who want to maintain their anonymity. But I think this day and age, most people are happy to and proud to say who they're supporting. Anyway, are there any questions before I pull up my presentation?
Nope.
Okay. Oh, Marion, I can't hear you.
Okay. I would like to know where exactly this money goes and how it is attributed, how it is divided. Let's say what kinds of sums of money we're talking about. I have no idea. I mean, the question sounds silly, but it's a simple question.
No, it's a great question. So, and I'll just give you, I'll talk using the example of Fidelity Charitable, because that's where I've been working the past 5 years. But like I said, it's not the only one. These large institutions, many of them now have, even community foundations have these, what they call donor advised funds. And the idea is that you are, however much, let's say, you put in $5,000 into this fund. And there's no requirement. You immediately get a tax deduction, and you don't even have to be American to do it. It makes it easier if you have your social security number, and then they just, you put it into this fund, this pooled fund. In the case of Fidelity, it's the biggest one. So it's going to go in with the $11 billion that they have sitting in there. So because of that, it's going to accrue interest. And at the end of the year, you're going to see additional money. So probably this year in a normal market, you'll maybe get an extra $1,000. That's free money for you. Now, only allocated for charity, right? So once you put the money in that fund, it's just earmarked for charity. You can't use it for any other purposes other than supporting nonprofit organizations. But that's fine because you're getting the tax write-off immediately. And then it's all maintained in this very user-friendly website. So you can go in there, and I do it every year. I love it because it's just, I go on there and I say, these are the 20 organizations that I'm funding this year. I select them on their website. If you go to fidelitycharity.org, fidelitycharitable.org, you can then open up an account. It takes a few minutes. It's very easy. And there's no minimum. You can put in $100 if you want, just to test it out and see. But what that does is, what I love is you can select how the money is invested. If you want. I personally, I'm an advocate of, and I've been working with a lot of donors. The other trend that now people are doing is allocating at least their philanthropic resources, but certainly if you can, financial as well, to ensure that they're investing in companies that are not doing harm in the world, right? So they call that impact investing or socially responsible investing. But basically the idea is that you're not funding ExxonMobil or companies that are doing harm to the environment or to human rights. And so you can select. So what I did is they have 4 pools that are these socially responsible funds. One's for the environment, one's for, social human rights, and you can just allocate. I just split mine up to 25% each. So I have 4 funds. And then I never think about it. The money, I just know that the money is invested in companies like the Patagonias of the world, these companies that are doing really good, that are socially responsible. They don't they don't pollute the environment. They give their employees all these great benefits. They're very gender equitable. They support, all these good things that we care about. And that, frankly, the reason as philanthropists, as donors, that we're funding organizations to address these societal problems, right? So it makes no sense to be investing on the side, having your finances be investing in supporting the companies that are discriminating, causing environmental contaminations. It's pointless, right? And so, and the data, the good news is the data shows that your returns are actually higher. Companies like these Patagonia companies do much better. They perform much better, like I mentioned earlier. So because they're more diverse, they have diversity across the company culture. So they make better decisions, right? And so anyway, so that's why I think it's a great tool to use, and it's the best kept secret. Most people, Fidelity Charitable a few years ago actually made it so that there was no minimum. It used to be that you had to put in minimum of 5,000, but the CEO, in the sake of democratizing philanthropy, said, let's just get rid of it. Let anybody put in whatever the amount they want, $100, doesn't matter. And then the nice thing is you don't have to worry about check writing or getting it's all on the website. So when it comes time to pay taxes, you just get a letter and it has everything, one simple letter for the IRS, and it's simple. And they automatically, they send the funds. They disperse the funds electronically to your favorite nonprofit organizations, right? And it can be to, your university or colleges, any 501c3, any registered 501c3 with the IRS is on that website. One thing that I also like about it is that they will check the nonprofit to make sure that there are no red flags, that there hasn't been any embezzlement, no lawsuits against them, as a way to protect you as well. So that way you don't have to worry about, any suspicious activity. And so that's another due diligence that they've built into the system. So anyway, long answer, but Marianne, this is why all these savvy philanthropists, this is what they do. They use these donor advised funds as a way to grow their philanthropic assets and to give away more. And then you have access to these peer networks as well. So then you're part of a community of donors that, they'll email you updates. Like, for example, if you are a Fidelity charitable donor, you can actually see it now, but they would email you, like with the Ukrainian crisis. Here's a list of organizations that we have vetted that are doing really great work to help with the humanitarian relief efforts in the Ukraine and in the region. And so it helps you, I think, be more strategic as a donor, and as you're thinking about what you can do, and you feel better about it. And I think I sleep better knowing that my dollars are going further supporting organizations that are really effective in doing good work. Does that answer your question?
Partially, yes.
Okay.
I would like to know exactly how the money is used. Do you buy food for Ukraine exactly, or
in terms of the
go
organization,
to university? Does this pay the tuition?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really depends on the organization that you choose. So you can choose, like just to give you an example right now, if you go to Fidelity's website, Fidelity Charitable's website, the organizations that they're featuring, these are emergency humanitarian response organizations, are some of the big ones. But we know that because they're intermediaries, they have such great connections in the region, they're able to deploy resources very effectively. And you can allocate, you can restrict your giving. You can say, if you're deeply passionate about ensuring that orphans or children are how your money is utilized, you can state that, and you can request that. We usually recommend general support and just let the organization use the resources where they need it most. But the ones that are featured right now are some of the large ones that you probably know, like CARE and Mercy Corps, Save the Children, UNICEF, USA for UNHCR. They have, so it gives you an opportunity. And they have one for medical response. If you care about the medical response, they've got International Medical Corps, Project Hope. If you care about the supply logistical response, they're recommending AirLink. It's a nonprofit based in Washington, DC. Information access, the nonprofit they're featuring is Internews. So this is an important piece, as we know, right? Having access to reliable, accurate information. in these disaster situations. So this is helping to support the trustworthy media outlets and journalists. So you can allocate. What I often do. I'm a proponent of having a balanced portfolio in general, both of my financial assets, but also my philanthropic assets and philanthropic organizations. So I always recommend that people support a variety of issues and approaches. And I personally, I like to give locally, nationally, and globally. And so in this case, if you want to cover your basis and say, okay, I want to select one from each of these different areas, you could do that and know that the funding is going directly to support each of those specific areas. Is that?
Yeah.
And again, these are great nonprofit organizations, right? That have been funded for decades and that are, you don't have to worry about how is the money utilized because they're highly rated, they're very responsible, and there's data that measures the impact that they're having in the regions that they work. And so, it just gives you that reassurance that the money is very well spent.
Okay. Thank you. Sarah Jane?
Christine, I just put something in the chat. I had posted on our issues page about the SEC was enacting sweeping climate disclosure rules for companies so that you can really know the impact of their businesses on the climate. And I guess a rule like this would make it that much easier for you guys to evaluate.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So that's part, we have a whole team. Fidelity Charitable is quite large now. It continues to grow every year. Luckily, American generosity and just global generosity, but in particular, as you know, Americans are the most generous donors in the world. And every year they keep getting more and more funding, which allows them to also then expand the team. Now we have over 300 people working at Fidelity Charitable, and they have an amazing team that vets all of these things, and so they have their rubric on each area. There's an investments team. So in fact, I just flew back very late last night from Raleigh, North Carolina, where they're headquartered, and met with both the program team, the people that are conducting the due diligence and working on the grant side, and then also with the investments team, which is the team that is reviewing all of the companies where these assets are being invested. So just ensuring that both sides are in sync. It's a huge operation, but it's so important. And I think it just can give us peace of mind in a time of uncertainty that your assets are being well utilized and you're funding the right organizations to address the issues that you care about personally. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to take a look at it. I had heard about, I hadn't read this one, but I think it's, as you know, you probably saw the climate change report recently that was put out, and it's quite depressing, right? It's, the things, as we know, the climate, here you are in Greece and it's freezing, it's absurd what's happening around the world, or it's, for anyone who disputes it, it's ridiculous, right? Because we have the evidence in front of us, and the climate, is changing drastically, and the animals are being affected, and it's heartbreaking to see what's happening. And we only have, I work with another great organization called Amazon Watch, which is an environmental organization focused in Latin America. And it's these indigenous community leaders that are desperately trying to protect the Amazon, because as you know, probably, the Amazon is critical to our oxygen levels. So I worked with a philanthropist in New York City who had read an article in the New York Times about this and said, gosh, they were not at all climate change environmentalists, but they read the article and were so concerned about their own oxygen. They said they ended up buying parts of the Amazon, whatever they could get their hands on. That's how wealthy they are. And they just said, we'll do our part to protect the land, because unfortunately it's being demolished, right? From big corporations to corrupt government. So it's a huge issue, but again, we're all affected by it. It's a small world, and what happens in the Amazon will affect us. And so we have to care as responsible global citizens, right? This is, it's a kind of a moral responsibility. I view it as a moral obligation, really, to do more and help in areas that, regardless of what your passion is, but think broadly about how these areas are interconnected. Any other questions before I? Okay.
So are the donors mainly American citizens and the beneficiaries also American or probably all over
Both.
the world?
So I'd say the majority of the donors that I work with are American, or maybe dual nationality. But we do have, I have some clients that I work with, one that's, I know, a Swiss, one of the most prominent Swiss French families, who lives here in the United States. But, we have a mix, but in terms of the organizations, the beneficiaries, it's global in nature. These organizations, like I said, there's thousands of nonprofit organizations now, and much to my chagrin, there are more added on a regular basis. And my advice to donors is to not start a new nonprofit organization, because there's more than likely there is one of the thousands out there that is either doing a good job addressing the issue that you care about, or you can partner with them and build off of the work that they're doing. Because unfortunately, there's too many. Most of them are based in California and the Bay Area, sort of the hub of the nonprofit world. And obviously the hard part is deciphering which ones are more effective than others, right? And so I think that's the part where my group comes in. I'm part of this, actually I should pull up the slide. Fidelity launched this philanthropic consulting group to help donors so that we can help them navigate and evaluate organizations and figure out which ones are the most effective and make recommendations that align with their values and their interests. Because it's overwhelming otherwise. If you were just to go on and do a general search, you would have no way of knowing necessarily. Like I said, you can look at ratings, but ratings can be deceptive, especially those that, the websites are only looking at one little piece of information. They're not looking at the whole pie. So you don't necessarily get to know really how effective they are with your money. And so that's part of what my team is doing, is working in that area, working with all donors anywhere in the world to help them just make better decisions and think about all of the components that make effective donors impactful.
Right. And you said before that you try to allocate all this money evenly among the different needs. Would you have a list of things that normally donors prefer to give their money to? I mean, what kind of needs do they want to meet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. It really does vary because, philanthropy is personal, right? It really is. It's about what you care about most. And what I tell people is, also thinking about maybe exploring a new area that you haven't necessarily thought about, just to see how it relates to the areas you care about. And so, the way we operate is, we have lists, we have curated lists around any thematic issue area you can imagine. And some of those are based on a combination. So for example, the Ukrainian one, we partner with the Center for Disaster Relief, which is probably the most regarded American organization focusing on disaster relief efforts. And so we collaborate with them closely. We have a lot of different partners. When we vet which organizations we think are the most effective to addressing the issue at hand. So we did the same thing with the Afghanistan crisis a few months ago. And as things arise, like during the elections in the United States last year, same thing. We worked closely with some of our democracy partners. There's an organization that I recommend if you care about the democracy issues called the Democracy Funders Network. And that group is actually a cross-partisan organization. I would say when I attended their first conference a few years ago in Sausalito in the Bay Area, I would say probably 75% were Democrats, 10% independent, and then the rest were anti-Trump Republicans, but who are just very concerned about the state of democracy and wanting to save it and do their part. Anyway, but that group is very strategic because they are, over the past couple of years, they've been instrumental. I think they were very strategic in helping ensure that Biden was elected. They really focused on the strategies in which states needed the most support. And so that's a group that, I work with closely because they they often will vet these other organizations and can make recommendations. And so I often will pull my list as a combination. I have a few different sources. The Democracy Fund is another one that I work with closely, and to compile these lists. So, and, you know, because again, this comes down to relationships. So much of it is, who are the leaders of these organizations? It's not enough. I've worked with some organizations who have a great rating on GuideStar, for example, or Charity Navigator, these websites that rate nonprofits. You can put anyone in there and they go up to a platinum rating. And I've worked personally with a couple that have platinum ratings, but they're not, their leadership is lousy, and they're not very effective at what they do. And so that's where building a relationship, either yourself or having, you know, a philanthropic advisor, or, you know, having a trusted source that you can run by and say, what do you know about this nonprofit before I make a donation to them? It's just, you know, going back to being a thoughtful, responsible donor, right? It's, you want to make sure you know who you're funding and to ensure that your money is going as far as possible. So anyway, the issues vary though, Marion. You can literally, you know, give me your passion. Education. Well, you can imagine there's a myriad. You know, do you want to fund education for women in Greece specifically? Absolutely, we can do that. Okay. So maybe I should segue into some of my presentations so you can see. What I did is I featured some of my favorites that I've, like I said, I've gotten to know very closely, but you know, this is not by any means you know, the absolute list to give. You know, there are others. So if the area that you care about is not represented, I'm happy to send you recommendations of others that align with your interest areas and values. But I will just pull up my screen here. And feel free to interject and ask questions as you'd like. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay. Oh, I can't share my screen. Who's Sarah Jane?
Could you please
Either
make sure
sharing is actually on my computer.
Oh, really? How about yours, Marion? Could it be yours?
Let me see. I don't have the instrument here, the application. It's not on me. Let's ask.
I've got those disabled as well, Sarah Jane, so double check.
No, I checked before we got on.
Let's turn over. Let's make Christine the host then.
I have changed it from one participant to multiple. Can you still not share, Christine?
Let me try it now. Let's see, here we go. Okay, no, I think it works now.
Because
Okay.
it was on one participant can share at a time, but maybe.
Perfect. Okay. So I think then that should work. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, perfect. Let me pull up let me just move my window here and I will pull this. Okay. So again, so, you know, focusing on just a few of the women's organizations that I have worked with closely. I'm going to skip some of these beginning ones because I already talked you through the group that I work with, which is this Fidelity Philanthropic Consulting group. And like I said, we work with individuals, we work with corporations, we work with donors who really want to implement an effective strategy for their grant making and being thoughtful. And some of them are really obsessed with measuring impact. I know you can imagine the very quantitative technology entrepreneurs, the Silicon Valley types, they are obsessed with impact measurement and reporting. So that's part of what I and my team does, is to make sure that, you know, for the more metrics driven quantitative person, that they're thinking about the right way of measuring the impact and then deciding how much to allocate as they renew funding each year. And then I work with families and individual, you know, for helping, especially next generation, I would say. One thing I'll say about that, it's been very interesting during the pandemic, as somebody noted, being at home for 2 years, you know, children have been at home with their parents, spending more time, a lot of kids home from college. Some of these philanthropists had reached out and said, oh goodness, my children are asking me questions around what our philanthropic portfolio of giving looks like around racial and social justice issues. And so that has become actually a very big trend for us, the philanthropic sector at large, I'd say, is that the more seasoned generation of donors are thinking now more thoughtfully about including a diverse and equitable, inclusive lens in their grant making, and ensuring that they're supporting not just organizations that are doing work around racial and social justice, but also in terms of funding diverse leaders from marginalized communities, right? So Black, Indigenous, Latino, all just to make sure that there's cross representation and that the leadership is being shared. So that has been an interesting trend. And so, yeah, so along those lines with the family philanthropy, I do a lot of trainings for the next generation and helping them also, really all generations, but particularly this next generation, of just making sure that they know what is needed to be an effective donor. And so we have education and learning webinars and programs that we also provide. I'm going to skip over this slide, but this is the slide that just shows you the evidence, the data, why these donor advised funds are much more effective way of giving to charity organizations over cash or check, right? Because with cash or check or credit card, you don't get any growth potential. Your money just is gone, right? But when you pool it into these funds, you're going to be getting extra free money allocated for charity. And then you can also donate anything. You can give, people donate stocks, people donate through their 401k, or you can do any type of assets, real estate. I mean, we have all types of contributions that are made, and that can all happen through the donor advised fund. They have very easy ways of ensuring that. So, okay.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure. Yes.
I'm unsure of why there's this extra money. Is it because this is a fund you put money into, and then
that's right,
the money that you allocate isn't allocated immediately, it's used to earn money?
That's right. That's right. So let's say you put money in now. Oftentimes people will do that, at the beginning of the year, and then the most popular time that donors give is at the year end, right? November, December timeframe. Because the holiday season and people are thinking about how being charitable, and also because a lot of the nonprofits budgetary cycles and fundraising cycles tends to be the end of the year, and so they have these fundraising goals and campaigns to reach out. So when you make your contribution, you allocate, and it's very easy, like I said, on any of these websites, you can go in and it can pull from whatever you want it to be. It can be a checking account, or you can donate stock, you can donate whatever you want. But then you get an immediate tax deduction, and then the money will sit there until however long you decide you want to give. So let's just say that in December, you decide you want to give to these charity organizations that you care about. It will have already accrued interest because it's been sitting. Your money is now building interest off of these, the $11 billion that's currently in the account. It's huge. It's the biggest in the world. And so, you're going to get something, and obviously it's market driven. So, if the economy crashes, worst case scenario, you stick with your, whatever you put in, you'll say $5,000. But more than likely every year since I've been there, the economy has done, well enough that everybody gets a pool. So you get a percentage, right? So it just depends. The more you put in, the more you're going to get, right? I had to call a donor the other day and remind them that they had a few $1 million just sitting there in their account because there was extra money that had accrued on their giving account. So that's how it works. And that's why you end up getting this additional growth of the asset that you make. Does that make sense? It can be a little confusing, but that's essentially how it works.
Makes sense.
Otherwise, it is money that is tax exempt.
Yeah, it's
Although-
tax.
Come on, Merritt, give us a break.
It is tax exempt. It's tax exempt. Yeah. So, but it will automatically, you don't have to worry about administering any of the paperwork. All that is all handled by them. They have a whole team that does that. So you'll, at the end of whenever it is you pay your taxes, you'll just get a letter that says, here are the 20 gifts that you made. You already received the tax deduction. It just simplifies it for you. So you don't have to keep track of it yourself. You don't have all the paperwork. It's just, they have a whole team that does it for you. So it just simplifies. It's just their motto is to make philanthropy simple, easy, and effective. You know, just that's the point of it all.
Even if the beneficiaries are outside the US.
Yes, that's right. So
The
even
money still exists.
even non-Americans can do this.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions, or I'll move on?
Let's go.
Okay. So so the organizations that I've selected, like I said, they've gone through extensive analysis in terms of their effectiveness. And I know, and I can vouch for their leadership. So I know the CEO, some of their board members, or some other staff. I have done, in addition to the general vetting, you know, gotten to know them personally. And so I can really attest and have seen their work firsthand. So the first, you know, and this was obviously challenging because there's so many great ones. You know, I have a more comprehensive list, but the ones I just wanted to highlight. I will tell you of these here. Pro Mujer. So this is for those of you who speak Spanish. Mujer is the word for woman in Spanish. It's a great organization. I actually love this organization so much that I ended up joining their board a couple of years ago. And so, you know, I will just so you know, I can tell you how highly I think of the organization. They have a new CEO who joined in January, although she had been working as the COO for the past few years. But their model is a really brilliant one. They're actually, in addition to being a nonprofit, they have this social enterprise arm, which is why I think they're a very strategic organization, because in addition to the general fundraising that they do every year, they get most of their funding comes from large foundations, corporations, and individuals like us. But they also have created this side business model that buys clinics and hospitals strategically in the countries where they're located in Latin America to help provide health services for the women, right? And so, and in the process, they can also generate some income from the investment properties. And so it goes into their endowment, and they're able to build to increase their assets. Very strategic. I love the innovative thinking about this organization. They've been working in Latin America for 30 years. You know, they have in terms of the impact statistics, so it's really impressive. You know, they've offered over 10 million healthcare services. This is mammograms, preventative screenings, pap smears, all these very important life-changing services that we all take for granted, but that are not as easy and accessible in other developing countries. So that's very powerful. They've helped transform over 2 million lives, and have given over $4.4 billion over the 30 years. And so they continue to grow. I tell people, you know, they're empowering these under-resourced women who would not have access to the kinds of resources that we would do otherwise. And they're very holistic in their approach. So they fund the life cycle, the whole life cycle of these women. So they will help support them. First, the health screening part is so essential, because unless they're healthy, they cannot work, right? So ensuring that their health services are taken care of, then they ensure that they're employed, whether, you know, provide skills training. For so many of them, they're incredible artisans, but being able to help provide them with a platform and an opportunity to be able to make a sustainable livelihood to support their families. So and then they're part of this network, which a lifelong network, which I just think is so powerful. As we know, being part of a community, and to know that you have a trusted network that you can rely on to help you throughout your life's journey and challenges that arise. So it's very powerful. And of course, the ripple effect is that the children of these women end up benefiting, and it transforms their lives so that they are then in a position to have more increased opportunity, and to hopefully overcome the cycle of poverty, right? So what many of the women have told us is that their children end up doing much better as a result, because they are able to have education opportunities that they wouldn't have, because the mother was able to increase her financial resources. through the employment. So I love how beautifully connected all of these points, life points have been made. So this is why I recommend them. They have these different, the financial training is another big piece, is that they also help these women with microloans, which is really important, because the part of the business is that, they have these great businesses and artists and craftsmanship, but they don't have an opportunity. And so this enables them to launch their own business, whether it's a little shop or wherever they are, to be able to then to run it and to manage it. And so we provide them with all of the resources around that piece. So the financial inclusion part of it, I think, is instrumental. And then there's also this one thing I mentioned earlier about the impact investing, the socially responsible investing. So to take it a step further, so gender lens investing, you may have heard about it, you may have read about it, and it's become more popular now as a very strategic way of moving the needle and affecting the lives of women and girls, both in the United States and globally, is to really be selective on how you're funding. So this is, again, you can do this through your philanthropic portfolio, your philanthropic fund, the donor advised fund, or through your financial assets. You can ask your financial advisor that you would like to ensure that you're funding socially responsible companies, and especially you would like a gender lens. If you care about gender equity issues, is what I'm saying, that then you would want to request that you have a gender lens filter, because it goes a step further. And what it does, it ensures that you are being very thoughtful and strategic about considering equitable practices and treatments from these companies, right? So that they are not in violation. So for example, that they ensure that their employees have maternity leave, right? It was something that is just outrageous in our country, that we do not provide women, that it is not a law other than a week maternity leave. It's just criminal, right? That we're the only developed nation in the entire world who does not allow does not just require this to enable women to have enough time off, a reasonable amount of time off, and to guarantee their job and employment, right? That's something that, of course, in Europe, it's much more enlightened, and they understand the importance of this and how you have to care for the mothers and not treat them like they're just disposable income, right? It's a human rights violation, and I just feel strongly that this is an area that I think the United States, I personally am trying to work on, help the United States to at least make some progress towards this, because it's outrageous. Anyway, but this is why I like them, because they are very mindful of the gender lens investing piece, and so they only support and invest their assets in companies that have, and you can actually invest through them as well, for those of you who care about this issue. They have these different funds, this ELU Women's Empowerment Fund, and they provide these different opportunities they convene an annual conference on gender lens investing, and it happened a couple of months ago, so it'll happen again this year. But anyway, so these are all really components of just building the skills and the entrepreneurial endeavors of these women, and connecting them to mentors and people who can help them throughout this process. They're scattered throughout Latin America, so they are not in every country, but many of them. And I think their plan is to grow. They would like to. But I also tell people who care about immigration issues, I say to them all the time, if you care about, people are concerned about immigration, and especially in the United States, I tell them there's no better way than to empower the women in these countries, right? When you talk to these women, they will tell you they don't necessarily want to leave their countries and their families. They would love to stay, but they don't have opportunities. And so unless there's a way for them to make a living to feed their children, they will have to immigrate, right? If it's a matter of life or death, they will do whatever they can, risk their lives to go to a country that can provide them with some opportunities to survive, right? So in terms of an investment perspective, I always tell people, think about supporting and building these women's movements in these countries, right? So that they then don't have to flee, because they would rather not. Anyway, I'll move on to the next one, unless you have any questions on this, on this region or this organization. Okay, so this next organization is called IPASS. And this is a great global organization that was started in 1973 And the mission of it is really to help with reproductive health opportunities and justice for women in countries all over the world. As you can imagine, I mean, like I said before, without the basic reproductive rights, these women are not able to have the same opportunities for education and for work. You know, this is oftentimes what holds these girls back who are getting pregnant, many against their will at a very young age. And so, you know, and ensuring that these countries are able to help provide girls and women with access to reproductive rights and tools and technologies and health systems is really essential, because without it, like I said, they're so limited. So this organization is doing really great work across 40 countries. You know, it's interesting. So they cite here, actually, speaking of Latin America, and I asked them for their slides so they could include some of their highlights here. You know, so in 2021, Argentina and Colombia liberalized their abortion laws, and several states in Mexico did the same. The Mexican Supreme Court paved the way for legal abortion nationwide. That was instrumental when this happened last year, because the women that they're supporting, including Pro Mujer, was saying how that then suddenly made it so that these women could change the course of their lives, right? They could then suddenly decide, because the violence, this goes back to the violence against women issue I talked about earlier, is so prevalent in these countries, sadly, and the rape is just terrible because of the cartels and this increased violence in general. And so the femicide, you probably have read some articles around this or heard about it, the femicide in the countries is increasing. And I know in Greece, you also see this, not to the same extent, but I remember Marianne, you sharing with me the increased violence. And of course, the pandemic has made it even worse because people have been trapped in their homes for 2 years. And so there's no option. And if these women do not have economic opportunities, then they're not able to go anywhere. And sadly, in many cases, it will lead to death. And so this is why all these issues are interconnected, right? So fundamental to support organizations that are addressing the violence against women, but also the reproductive rights, because it builds upon itself, right? It has a domino effect. Another great organization that I love, it's called World Pulse. This organization, I also know the founder personally, met her in San Francisco about, 15 years ago almost. And she has started this great organization globally. The idea is to connect women around the world. And now they have over 80,000 network members. It's free to join. Anyone can be a part of the community. But they really provide them a safe platform, which is a really important component, where they can bring up any kind of issue that they're facing. These women, and some of them are actually communities or women leaders, but anybody, there's no criteria. You just have to be you just have to care about supporting women and girls. Men are invited to join this platform as well, in case you're wondering. The idea is that these are, anybody who cares about building and supporting gender equity. And so they're now featured in 227 countries and territories. They're really great about empowering and lifting the voices of these communities and making sure that people do not feel that they're in isolation. This is part of the problem. And I think during the pandemic, this is where their community was so powerful, because in some cases, their only lifeline was through the internet. And so just to be able to share their story, or it was a lifeline for some people. I mean, we take for granted having a phone and being able to call a hotline if there's an issue or something, or a crisis. In many countries, they don't have that. And so this provides them with even places where they can connect and to be able to even just call for help, or connecting them with other people who are dealing with similar issues. And then they also provide trainings. So they have this digital savvy change maker program, and they're basically trying to create more of these digital ambassadors to help their communities, specifically, especially for those communities who don't have internet access. So then they go with that and they share their stories. So it's a platform to amplify their voices on behalf of them. And I think this goes back to the power of storytelling and how history is recorded, right? So it's very important that we learn from these experiences and stories. And so another organization that I love is called the NOMI Network. And NOMI is a phenomenal organization led by a young woman who is grew up bicultural. Also, she's was raised, eventually moved to New York City, but came from a Vietnamese family. And the mission is to end human trafficking and provide these pathways for safe and sustainable employment. So they have an incredible training program that they offer these women and girls to help break the cycles of slavery that continually perpetuate in their families and communities. And a lot of this, as you know, unfortunately, in poor families and countries, developing countries, they have to, their only resource sometimes is, if they can't immigrate, is to sell off the daughter. Usually it's the daughter into slavery, right? And so, and that can be all forms of, whether it's initially they think they're going as a nanny, and then, you know, it turns out that they're being sex trafficked. So it's a hard issue for a lot of people to handle, but I think it's a very important one that deserves attention. And again, we all experience it, right? So the young girls who are being trafficked and women who are being trafficked in the United States, and obviously there's some in Greece too, and every country that have them, they're connected from other parts of the world, a lot of them from Asia and Africa and Latin America. And so this organization is very effective. They have won awards for being such an impactful organization because they're very strategic and working with the girls and providing these trainings and activities to really change the course of their lives. And so they're also part of a network and a community that works together to ensure that they do not fall back into that, because unless they are given the training to have a successful income and career opportunities, they will oftentimes end back into these slave situations. And so, yeah, it goes back to the whole poverty piece, right? That's, you know, so survivors struggle with poverty and risk being re-trafficked. So this is something that is ongoing. India obviously is a country that has huge allocation of girls going into trafficking. A lot of them, of course, in other parts of Asia, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines. The office of NOMI Network is in Dallas. Dallas actually has a huge trafficking problem. Lots of big cities do, of course, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, but they're sadly, you know, they are often overlooked and do not receive the kind of support that are needed. And so I just wanted to shed light on the importance of the work that they're doing. They're very marginalized. So just to say that, you know, trafficked women and girls are kind of the oftentimes just the least funded. Another great organization is part of UNICEF, and they have this incredible program called Education Cannot Wait. So Marian, I know you care about education. This is one that you might be drawn to. It's the first global fund dedicated to education in emergencies and protracted crises. So, you know, here they've outlined, so there's 75 million school-age children and youth that are in desperate need of education and support. I mean, it's just to think about 75 million school-age children, I mean, it's just unbelievable, that are in danger and already missing out on their education. So the communities highlight the importance of education during times of crisis, and education appeals receive less than 2% of humanitarian funding. It's very low. And as you know, the right to education is most at risk during emergencies, like now, the pandemic, Ukrainian crisis. I mean, all these. So these are moments where this is another great fund if you're thinking about how you can help. You know, this fund was created specifically for that reason. So it's this new global fund to transform delivery of education in emergencies. And it joins up with governments, humanitarian actors, and development efforts to deliver a more collaborative and rapid response to the educational needs of children and youth affected by the crises. And the fund really aims to reach all crisis-affected children and youth with safe, free, and quality education by 2030. So they have very goal-oriented as well. As you probably have heard, the UN has these sustainable goals that have been set out, and you know, governments are committing to working towards this. A lot of the philanthropists that I work with will, in fact, well, you can see maybe I'll show it to you if you haven't seen them, but I have it on my wall here because I look at them every day. These are the issue areas that governments and UN and international aid organizations are committed to addressing. You know, every year, every decade, there's a new set of goals. Let me pull it off so I can show you. So are, you may have seen these before. So let's see here. The Sustainable Development Goals are so alleviating poverty, hunger, good health and well-being, quality education. This is the one that's addressing this. Gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, so the oceans and the seas, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, democracy space, and partnerships for these goals. And so, you know, the UN, if you go to the UN's website, oh, my thing is a little blurred, sorry. If you go to the United Nations website, you can see these Sustainable Development Goals, and you can, you know, you'll see how they're mapping out. But this is where UNICEF, obviously one of the divisions of the United Nations. There's also UN Women, by the way, which is another separate entity of the UN that focuses specifically on gender equity. I also have a few colleagues who work there, and they're doing great work as well. So I would add them to the list. You know, this is just making the case for funding this, right? So education is the strongest defense against any armed groups. And this is the teacher speaking, right? Saying it's her job to provide these children a solid basis for learning. So she's teaching 40 children in her own yard, you know. So this is, but again, this is in some cases, this is going to make or break the lives of these children. You know, if they don't have at least a chance of having an education, they're just so limited, and often will end up being trafficked. This is why you can see why all these issues are so interconnected. And so their approach is that they're very strategic in how they're measuring their impact. They're really good also about outlining how they're going to address it. Part of it you can see here is they've outlined the improving data, evidence, and accountability, inspiring political support and financing, improving joint planning. So you know, they're doing great work. I mean, you know, there's so many other ones, but for the sake of time, I wanted to just highlight a few of them and see if you have any questions.
Wow.
Well, thank you.
I know it's a lot.
All this is overwhelming, actually.
I know it is a lot. It is overwhelming. I know. I mean, it's hard to consolidate, but you know, just to give you a taste for the types of organizations that are out there and that are doing such good work and really needed.
Yes. Are we ready for some questions now for Christine? Any questions at all from our members?
I have a question.
Jane?
So leading up to this, I was trying to post things on our website that might support the talk that we're having tonight. And so I came across some news about Apple. They listed their statistics, their hiring statistics of women and unrepresented minorities into leadership. And evidently they're making a lot of progress. Now, I know it's not required for them to post these statistics, but there seems to be an industry push to do this. Is that something that you have found has been?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely, Sarah Jane. Great question. I'm so glad you brought it up because it actually connects to the gender lens investing movement. There's actually another great group that I love that is being led by a woman named Kristen Hull, but she's based in Oakland, California, but she has created a fund called NIA Capital, NIA. And she actually does exactly that. That Apple one that you mentioned was because of Kristen. So she targets companies that she knows. And actually, for that matter, I mean, it's been so enlightening. We all have access and we can attend any of these shareholder meetings. They're public. You know, so many of us have Apple products. And you can actually call in and you can participate and you can ask, you know, what are you doing to address these X, Y, and Z issues? Kristen does that brilliantly. And she attended the Apple shareholder meeting, and she will ask these very probing, deep, direct questions to them. What are you, here's your record on gender equity, on racial and social justice, on diversity, et cetera. And will basically force their hand in a sense, because the last thing any of these companies want is bad publicity. And they certainly, because it affects their bottom line. If for nothing else, doing the right thing is for a greedy, profitable reason. But if it benefits society, so be it, right? We'll take, hopefully, and this is why I like to reward, and I mentioned Patagonia a few times, but that company, for those of you, well, you may need warmer coats. So just in case you're looking for a warmer coat, Patagonia has great products. I just got a new, they're having good sales too. I just bought a new one on sale. But that company is led by really caring, thoughtful, philanthropic leaders who want to do good in the world and who want to change the world. And so we as consumers have the power to direct and support companies that are doing good. I make it a point not to buy things from companies that I know, like for example, Home Depot versus Lowe's, these two big stores in the United States for supplying goods. I never buy at Home Depot because I know that they funded Trump and that their leaders are, on the wrong side of history. And so Lowe's, on the other hand, funded the Democrats. And so, those are the kind of strategic leadership questions I think we as citizens need to be more mindful of and asking, why am I going to give my money to support a company that is doing something against my values and interests, right? And so this is where it connects to this very point, Sarah Jane, which is so important. I don't think I'm even doing enough, and I feel like there's so much, but what I can do, at least what we can do, is invest our dollars into the right things that are doing good. So Kristen is doing it on behalf of all of us to address the diversity and the gender equity piece by holding these companies accountable. And she's often, if you Google her, you can find her. She's often on interviews on TV and radio, et cetera.
Right. Do you know, are there any nonprofits that are actually trying to push for legislation to make it that companies must report these, or to affect the same sort of gender diversity law in California federally? Like in Finland, we all know that, or maybe also in Sweden, maybe it's this whole group of northern countries, on all boards, women must be represented. And I'm wondering, is there someone working on that in the US? And can you share with us who that is?
Yes, so a great organization, such a good question. I'm glad you brought it up. And they were actually they're on my list of gender organizations that I love that are doing great work. And I would have featured them had more time. Equal Rights Advocates. So they are great. It's called ERA, Equal Rights Advocates. And they are they're based in San Francisco, but it's a national organization that is doing exactly that. And they've been instrumental in helping to pass equal pay. They were involved in a lot of the legislation to help advance gender women's rights. And so they're a great one. I support them personally as well because of this exact point, that it's really important. Unless I'm a huge advocate of changing laws and policies because it's the fastest way, right? I mean, our country, unfortunately, United States doesn't do a good job with the whole quota thing like they do in Europe. I think, again, Europe does certain things much better, and I think that's one of them. But in the absence of that, we can at least support these nonprofits that are trying to pass laws and policies, both at a state and federal level. And so, yeah, Equal Rights Advocate is a great one. And I know their CEO so I encourage you to fund them as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Great questions. Any others?
Randall, Charity, Spiranda, Anna, any questions before we close?
I'm unmuted, Marion, so let me jump in.
Yes.
One of the things that occurs to me, and I've been following this as best I could while doing other work, but you've got a really good workup on the people that you work with, the organizations that you work with, and their platinum or lower ratings. Is there something like that we can get outside of the investment area? But is there one or two go-to sites where we could find out this group that's advocating this or that? Are they really doing it, or are they basically a website and a name?
Yes, no, there are, and it's such a good question. And I'm glad you mentioned. What I can do is I can follow up and send you an email that lists some of the websites that are recommended to vet companies. You know, so if you have the time, I mean, you can actually go and I recommend it. It's interesting to do that. And I don't have the websites with me offhand, but I can get them for you because it's a great exercise to do this, to put in some of the company names that you're funding in right now, if you have stocks or any investments, just to see how they fare, and they have them ranked so you can see what their scoring is on how are they on the environment, how are they on gender equity, racial, social justice, all these things that we care about. And so you can know, and then suddenly you see, wait a minute, this company that I thought was okay is actually terrible, going against all my values and principles. And so you have a say, and you can change those. This all takes time, of course, which is why, you know, I recommend it's easier, unless you have the time and interest to do that. But if you do, great, it's good for you. But if you don't, you can just talk to your financial advisor. A good financial advisor will do this for you. If they're not doing their job, then Kristen is somebody who I would recommend, because she's really great about doing this. She manages funds. She only invests in funds that are equitable on every criteria, related to our shared values. So,
Christine, what about for the folks who don't have a financial advisor, who don't have a fund of 500K or above, that they actually have an advisor? Where do they get the information?
Well, so these websites, you can get this on the website. So I'll get the links for you, and you can actually go in and you can just check if you care to. You can check it yourself personally. Anybody can do that. But there's also a great company called Portfolia, with an A at the end, like portfolio, but with an A, Portfolia, because as you can guess, it's all about women supporting gender equitable practices and companies, and women-led companies, because as you probably read, unfortunately, venture capital funding for women is less than 3%. It's tiny. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. It used to be 1%. It's barely grown. Most of the funding for entrepreneurs goes to support men. And so these are male-led companies. And then, they're deciding a lot of the resources in the world, right? So Portfolio is a great company. I love it because it invests specifically in supporting women entrepreneurs, but there's no minimum to join. A lot of the big funds, you have to have a minimum of, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 5,000, sometimes it's 500,000. I mean, they can, different criteria, but Portfolio doesn't have a minimum. So, or if they do, it's very small. I mean, it's, something that we can do. It's not anything, it's minimal, but it's one of the only ones that does that. And you can actually allocate it from your 401k or any of your retirement assets, however you have it set up. You can say, I'd like to allocate whatever percentage you want towards Portfolio. And then you just know that your money is doing good, supporting these women-led companies who, by the way, have great returns. I mean, this is the other thing. The data shows that these women CEOs end up performing better. They outperform their peer male counterparts. So, you're doing good on many levels and making financial asset returns.
Great. Christine, when you send us all this information, can you send us also your presentation? You can send it all on Google on the Gmail, and that way I can put it onto we usually keep a Google Docs file with the resource page, and then we link that to the website, and sometimes we post on our private Facebook pages so that everyone can have access to that information. That would be great. Absolutely. I'm happy to. I'd be delighted to do so. Yeah. And, spread the word, really. Now, I'm sure there are others who were not able to attend, but my goal is to personally try to get more people to pay attention to these issues, because we know that it can help make a huge difference in improving the world, right? So on a local level, national, global, again, you can decide, and ideally you do a little bit of each. But it's really up to us. The future is in our hands, and we have the power to decide how to allocate our own funding. And we don't have to, as consumers, like I said, there's a huge opportunity there that I think is just the tip of the iceberg now, as there's an awakening of, where is our money going? And it is very political at the end of the day. So Democrats abroad in Greece, you're doing great work. Well, I mean, I think the fact that there are all these studies that show that, democracy is also linked to women's status. Yes. And if you think about in America, what's happening and the laws that are being enacted, and not just in the southern states, in places like Idaho and just wherever, it's scary to think that they're rolling back progress for women at the same time we're rolling back democracy in America. And I can
Yes.
see that maybe they're linked. So I think all the
Yes.
support that you're talking about in terms of women and women's group is really super important politically. Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, definitely. No, it connects directly to the mission of your organization, your community, and what you all care about. So you all can be the leaders to spearhead this in Greece, and to spread it with your communities, right? Both in Greece and in the United States, and anywhere really for that matter. I mean, again, this is a really important issue that affects everyone.
And further, Christine, because I mean, it's pretty easy for us to share this to the Global Women's Caucus, which is extremely active, Democrats abroad. And I mean, I'm thinking that this presentation should not just sit here this evening. It needs to go to all of our country committees and all of our caucuses, the Environmental Caucus and the Progressive Caucus and the Global Black Caucus. They would all have a lot of stake in what you've presented tonight. So
Thank you. I would love that. That would be fabulous. Thank you for doing that.
Lots of work for you, Christine, for the next few months.
That's right.
Globally.
Oh, it's a labor of love. It's a passion. So for me, it's, I do this every day because I love it, and I'm always on a mission to get more people to spread the word. So it's up to us. I'm confident. I'm an optimist at heart. So I think we can do it. I think we have this very small window of opportunity that we can help improve things for women and girls, democracy, the environment, all these, and society at large. So I think it's really upon us, and this is our moment to make it happen. And I just want to say, Peter, thank you for staying. I think there was only 2 men on the call, but I always say that, the most enlightened men you're instrumental. You're our partners in crime, and the smart ones understand why this matters.
Thank you very much, Christine, for sharing all of this information with us, for being here for us to enlighten us, to show us what is happening in the world outside the US and in the US for the moment. And we hope to hear from you again soon.
It'd be a
Thank
pleasure.
you everybody for watching us. Is there anything?
Christine, thank you on behalf of Dems Abroad. One of the things that your presentation pointed out was we've got plenty of calls to action here. There's a lot of things that we can do based on the information that you've shared with us. And I think that's fantastic. I mean, I'm walking around away now with a list of 5 different things that I need to do for my next investment, whether it's in a new coat or whether it's where I want to put my money. So thank you very, very much. This has been very beneficial.
Oh, I'm so delighted to hear that. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you all today and get to know you all. And I hope to meet you in person the next time I'm in Greece. And look forward to staying in touch and supporting each other.
Great.
Thank
All
you so
right.
much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all. All the
Thank you.
best. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good
Thank you
night.
very
Good
much.
night, everyone. Thank you all for
Very
coming.
interesting.
Christine will
Thank
be
you
near
all.
Billion, Sarah Jane, in the summer.
Oh, wonderful.